Fitzy and Whipper with Kate Ritchie podcast.
We love getting this man in. He's a paediatrician with over 18 years' experience in working with children in a number of settings. He's got a great podcast called Pop Culture Parenting. It's Dr Billy Garvey. Bill, welcome!
Dr. Billy!
Thank you.
Mate, we couldn't get enough of you last time you came in, Dr. Billy, and neither could our listeners. So 13 24 10 if you've got a question for Dr. Billy Garvey this morning.
Yeah, so it was such a pleasure to have you in here. And I have to say, I am listening to Pop Culture Parenting, and I got involved after we had you in here last time, because what I love about you is that you're really down to earth. You've lived a life, and I'm sure that actually is appealing to people that have the privilege of being able to see you, because you're not a doctor telling them what to do. You've lived quite possibly some of the experiences that they are there seeking help for. But the podcast I've been listening to at the moment it's over the 2 eps. It's the most recent you've done, I think, and it's about developmental trauma. So it's full on. But what's great, and if you haven't heard the podcast, the pop culture part comes from you drawing on great classic films, and using them as an example of perhaps Arrested Development or like parenting fails and that kind of thing. Developmental trauma. You've been talking about Batman Begins, and I love the way you paint Batman, because of course we're sat down in front of the telly as a kid or even as an adult and we think Batman's a hero. He's such a hero. Yeah. Can you tell us, just so we get a gauge of what the podcast is like, what's your take on Batman?
Yeah, well, my take, a lot of little kids aspire to be Batman, like he's this hero and he's tough and he can face anything. But in reality, he's a little boy that lost both of his parents at a young age and he's just trapped in that childhood trauma. And we know that childhood trauma at any stage really just pauses development. So what means is he's stuck as this scared, terrified little kid who's just hostile, wants to fight everyone,
horrible,
doesn't
life.
Trust anyone.
Yeah.
So it's pretty awful. So it kind of takes the aspiration part out of I'd love to be Batman.
You don't think of it like that, do you?
No.
He's got a cape and he's doing all the good things.
You just want to give him a hug, Bill, don't you?
Yeah, totally.
You
well,
and you know what? You can be yourself. Yeah. Stop trying to be Batman. Stop trying to put the suit on, guys.
That's the thing.
Be what's his name? Bruce Wayne. What Batman needs to do is print up a photo of Bruce Wayne as a young child and reflect on it every morning and make good choices for that child that he once was.
I know we touched on it last time, Dr. Billy, but we're talking about that, Kate, and the idea that, parents put a lot of pressure on themselves and sometimes you need to be reminded that you, as a parent, are enough.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of the hard things is that, we know a lot of kids in Australia and around the world are suffering from developmental trauma. I've seen 4 of them yesterday that, have waited years to see us and really struggling. But there's all these protective factors, and the research shows us that they're really helpful. And very quickly, feeling like I have people in my family I can talk to about my feelings, participating in community traditions, having a role in my school community. There's someone in my family that keeps me safe, friends that have a genuine interest in me, and 2 non-parental adults that really care about me.
That's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is, the 3 of you are probably that non-parental adult that genuinely cares about a kid in their life. And that's really protective because a lot of people will experience developmental trauma unintentionally.
And sometimes they experience that within the home. I think you've spoken about is it household
dysfunction.
Dysfunction, and that's just something that maybe cannot even be pinpointed in far lesser circumstances, but it's still classified as trauma, being brought up in a house where things aren't as they should be every day.
Yeah, so I was brought up by, a single mum who had mental illness, a lot of household dysfunction, but the reality is she was doing her best that she could and she'd never been shown any different. We know a lot of families that we see in clinic will come in and they'll feel safe enough to talk about that they might be smacking their kids or just telling them to toughen up or whatever, and it gives us an opportunity to say there's a better way. because we know the biggest indicator of how you parent will be how you were parented, but we can actually change those cycles and, try and undo some of the barriers to that connection and responsiveness and predictability that every kid actually needs.
Doc, as we get older and, we've finished school now ourselves, we think as parents that bullying has sort of stopped at schools, but it hasn't. It's horrific. And it's, for any parent out there that is experiencing bullying with their child at the moment, and, there's all these different things that we hear that, approaching that child that's bullying your child, approaching the parent of that child, having a go at the school, telling your child to have a go back. I would love to hear from you. But in this moment, what's the best thing to do with the child that is the subject of constant bullying at school?
Yeah, so you need to think about those protective factors. So a lot of the kids that I see in clinic have experienced or are experiencing bullies. Sometimes they're the bullies. You know what I mean? They're the kids that are just hostile towards everyone. They're acting out and they're lashing out. And also a lot of bullying is just trying to reinforce the fragility in their own ego. So they're like, I'm big and tough, but unless I'm constantly putting people down and pushing them down and reinforcing that thoughts about myself, it doesn't help. So you have to address that. But the kids, thinking about the protective factors of the kids that are being bullied is really important, because it takes a long time to shift those communities at school. It's really important there's a zero tolerance, but what most of the evidence shows is schools need to do it proactively.
Right.
So I go and work and spend a lot of time with schools, and I'm really happy for anyone that reaches out to go and talk to them. You've got to build proactive narratives in your school community. So it's not the post on the wall that says where you don't accept bullying doesn't really help. What helps is if you tell stories and you get people in leadership positions within the school community to stand up in front of the community and say, this is what it felt like when I was bullied.
Yeah, right.
And what it shares that with people, and people who might think it's funny or not realise it's happening and things like that, they go, well, the poster didn't really get me, but hearing Samantha talk about it, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
And then, you build that community proactively and protectively so that when it, small blips happen, the whole community calls it out and says, we're better than that. Not, Billy, you're terrible for bullying, but we can actually do better than that. We care about each other and look after each other.
Yeah.
So, just jumping on that, Kate, with parenting too, I think when you're in a situation, whether your kid's the bully or your kid's being bullied, as a parent, you're trying to find the answers and you're not constantly scrambling. But I think one of the main things as the kids grow up is you just hope that communication is there and the conversation is true and it's open and it's honest and they can share.
Definitely. A funny story without naming who it was, but someone quite prominent. I was doing some media with them, and before we went on air, they were saying, oh, Billy, it's so great to talk to you. I want to tell me this great story. And they were like, I told my son he was getting bullied at school, and I sat down and had a frank conversation with him. It was like, this is what you're going to say tomorrow to the bully. You're going to walk in there, you're going to walk up to him, even though he's twice your size, and you're going to go bang, bang, bang. I don't accept this again. If you do, I'm going to punch you in the nose, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, oh my God.
No.
And then we cut to air, we roll, we record some stuff. And I couldn't get out of my head. And then I just talked to him and he was exploring his parenting.
Yeah.
And I realised he was able to do that because of what he also does. And he's like, because I was talking about all the stuff I do. And he's like, Billy, every night I do what you're talking about. I lie down in my bed and I lie next to each of my kids for at least 15 minutes and we just talk about the day and I just listen. And I'm like, yeah, that's beautiful. That's the power in that guy's parenting.
Yep.
And that's why he almost kind of got away with just walk up and confront him, because imagine how intimidating that is as a little kid.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, what if I can't? Well,
you wouldn't sleep that night, would you? Ahead of the day of the thing that you have to do, the thing that Dad said, because I have to stand up to the bully. And if I don't stand up to the bully, I'm going to continue being bullied. And I'm also going to let my dad down.
Yeah, and going back to Batman, that's the false narrative of Batman. It's like you rise up through adversity, but the risk is you rise up dysfunctionally.
Yes.
You're like hostility. Like men are hopeless at this. They're like, conflict is how I resolve everything.
It's not
someone's
normality.
annoyed me. I'm going to go out there and face up to them.
Kate, you were going to extend on the bullying. You had a question for Dr. Billy.
I did. I have so many questions for Dr. Billy. I can't, like, on air, off air, on the phone, in Melbourne at the clinic.
Email, pager,
no,
fax.
When you were talking about bullying, we often talk about bullying from the, I don't know if we call them the
bully?
victim of bullying.
Or the victim.
Or my kid's being bullied. it's sometimes very hard to stop and consider the bully themselves, especially if your kid is coming home and they don't want to go to school tomorrow because there's a kid bullying them. Let's not forget that there are parents probably listening to this now. They are the parents of the bully, and that can also be
traumatic,
incredibly hard. And the bully, I'm not saying that bullying is okay by any stretch, and they make the lives hard of lots of other people around them, but the life of the bully, that's not a pleasant place to be either, is it? Like, if so, is there any advice for parents who are pulling their hair out? They're getting calls from the school every day. They don't know, perhaps they're at a loss as to why the child is acting like this. We don't act like this in our home. Why is this happening? Are there any tips around that? You know, you talk a lot about providing, safe and predictable kind of environments around everyone, regardless of whether they're being bullied or the bully. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. Particular to the bully or any kid that's, not doing well in a school environment, we see all behaviours as flares, and what people want to do is often fix the behaviour, but there's always a reason for the behaviour. And kids who are bullying, we talked about that fragility in their ego. They're more likely to have kind of a learning disability, an intellectual problem.
And that's how they deal with it.
Yeah, that's how they deal with it, because a lot of the time you want predictability. So the kid in the classroom that, is struggling socially, goes out in the playground, no one wants to be mates with him. If he gets in a fight...
Everyone loves him.
Well, everyone loves him, but also that anxiety's gone. Because you're like, I don't have to sit here and realise no one wants to actually interact with me.
Yeah.
I can just realise I get sent to the principal's office, I'm the tough guy and I'm in trouble, and everyone's like laughing at me because I'm the class clown. But he's out of that vulnerable experience of like, no one wants to actually be mates with me.
Well, how do you get through to that kid then, Bill? Like, how do you convince that child that, no, mate, how do you convince a young child that...
Better to be vulnerable.
But I don't know if it's about... Is it about convincing? It's actually about, like you said, going to the root of the matter. You can't just tell someone to stop changing any of their behaviour, because the behaviour comes from a circumstances or an issue of its own.
But if he feels like he's being left out, and the only way that he can get attention is by bullying and doing something to a child, how can you convince that child that when you're in that situation, you feel like, well, I'm not getting attention here? What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, I earn his trust and I build a relationship with him.
Yep.
And so in clinic, I sit there and I meet a lot of these kids, and the parents waited 2 years. They sit down and they go, Billy's terrible. He doesn't listen to us. He gets kicked out of school every day. He's got no mates and we just can't stand him. And the kid just sits there, and I'm always baffled going, how is this kid okay hearing this stuff?
Yeah.
But I have to give that space for the parent, because the parent needs to tell that story and all that stuff. But then I slowly connect with that kid and build the narrative. And two things that I often teach, like we train all the fellows in developmental peds, I often teach them, ask what do you enjoy and what do you think you're good at. And those are two very different things to all the stuff you're bad at, all the stuff you're failing at. And they sit there, and there's a lot of kids that can't give an answer to either of those questions because they're just used to being the bad kid. But every kid I've ever worked with, I've found an answer to those questions. And I'm a tiny part of their lives. Teachers are the ones that are actually guiding them, So I think that's a really important shift to say, like, every kid should feel like they're good at something. And a lot of kids, it's not going to be the school, it's going to be the footy ground, it's going to be, the scout hall, it's going to be dancing, and they all have to have that constant reiteration of there are things I put effort into that I see success, because a lot of kids, it won't be school.
Do you get extreme satisfaction? And I look at you and I think of Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting. When there is a moment though, Bill,
There's a movie.
No, but when you get through to a patient, and that's why it's such a beautiful movie, that one, because Matt Damon is so difficult. No one can get through to him, and Robin Williams finally does. And that moment, is that something that's extremely powerful for you when you get through to a child and you know that it's working? Yeah,
definitely. We've actually done that movie and that scene on the podcast about, kids, bad kids, because there are no bad kids in that kind of scene. But it's hugely fitzy. Like I've worked a lot of different jobs. Like we joke about, I grew up in a bit of a rough area and drove forklifts and worked in factories and all that stuff. But I love those jobs. But I now, like, I walk into work every day at one of the biggest kids hospitals in the world, and I just have the privilege of hearing stories that families are not comfortable telling anyone else.
Yep.
And I'm a tiny bit of these kids' life. A teacher will spend more time in a day than I'll spend with these kids in a year. But I get to journey with them, and it's this really beautiful privilege that they'll often come in and someone might be thinking, oh, is it autism? Is it ADHD? They need medication. And sometimes I have to think about that stuff. But what I'm actually trying to do is change the trajectory of these kids and change their futures. And, you know, I was joking to Kate outside the studio before, I'm kind of spend a lot of time just looking for myself in clinic because, you know, and so it is this really selfish pursuit. It kind of comes off. I even say that to families. I'm like, no, I'm not doing you a favour. I'm paid to do this and I love it. It's my job. You're going to actually decide whether I'm actually doing it well or not. Not me.
Dr. Billy, is there any place for, I mean, if we get on the topic of bullying, is there any place for he hit me, so I'm going to hit him back?
There's a place for understanding that response because you're seeing, like, as the kid, whatever age really, like it's, you know, it's a really common thing really in 2-year-olds. Like 2-year-olds have got this interesting gap in their development where they have the mobility and the language to influence their environment, but they don't have the ability to go, I wonder what it's like to be this kid. That's mid-primary school. Kids get that. It's called theory of mind. Asking like a kid in grade 1 to be like, well, what do you think he felt like? Is you may as well be asking him to play the violin. He's never seen one.
Forget about it.
So, you know, I think when kids get older though and they start developing that understanding, I can understand why you feel like that, but how did it feel to be you? You know, and I think you're better than this. I think we're better than this, and we're going to build these skills together because you're a leader, you're a caring person, all that narrative, as opposed to stop doing that, it's bad. It just doesn't give kids a pathway to anything.
Yeah, sure. This is full stop.
Doc, we're getting a lot of calls, and parents that want to talk to you. Can you stick around with us?
Yeah, definitely.
That'll be great. We'll do that next. It is Fitzy, member with Kate Ritchie. Joined this morning by Dr. Billy Garvey. His insight into parenting and, you know, and dealing with himself, you know, growing up sort of in a rough childhood himself and dealing with children over the years has been, this has been amazing. And we're getting a lot of calls here from parents that want to get involved, like Anne in Narrabeen. Hi, Anne.
Hi, how you going?
Good.
Anne.
You got Dr. Billy Garvey here.
Hi, how you going?
Great, thanks, Anne.
I've got a quick question. I have a level 2 autistic son that's on the spectrum. He's age 6. But what are the main points of being diagnosed with autism? Because I've got a 5-year-old that has exactly the same traits as he did, but she's kind of the complete opposite, where he was mellow. She's very hyped.
What is level 2, Dr. Billy?
Yeah, so with autism, when we diagnose it, so medical models are very deficit-based. We're trying to work on that. It's a big problem, but it's like,
broad.
Yeah, but also like it's all about negative stuff and things that kids can't do or struggle with. So level 2 autism, when we diagnose autism, there's level 1, 2 and 3, and it depends on how much support you need. Level 1 is what might have been Asperger's. I don't know if you guys have heard of that term before. That doesn't exist in our medical criteria anymore. So that's really level 1, which means kids need a little bit of support, but they're doing okay. The challenge for us is that especially girls will mask a bit and they kind of hide it. They get home and they're really struggling and they kind of erupt because at school they're doing what's called masking. They're realising that, hey, if I do that thing where everyone thinks I'm weird because I do it, people will look at me, so I better not do it. Problem is that's how you alleviate your anxiety.
Yes.
Like stimming is an example of that. Level 3 is often kids who might be in special development schools, might have difficulties with their verbal, expressive language, stuff like that. So the question is a really good one. Siblings are much more likely to meet criteria for a diagnosis of autism. It's about 1 in 60, just baseline population at the moment. 2 big things you need to meet criteria for a diagnosis of autism: social and communication difficulties. So that's like, I can't understand Fitzy's facial expressions, non-verbal cues. They really struggle with that stuff. That's why often kids with autism won't look you in the eye for a sustained period, because they don't pick up all of the social communication of it. But I can see that Fitzy's like interacting, engaging, wants me to keep talking because of all the non-verbal stuff he's doing. They really struggle to initiate or maintain friendships. That's another really important part of it, and that's why often they kind of end up doing their own thing. They actually are often very empathetic, but they really struggle with it. They get completely overwhelmed with empathy, so they'll avoid because of that. So that's all the social communication stuff. Often kids don't have early language acquisition. So most kids who are 2 have 2 words, 50, 200 words. They can understand a couple of step instructions. Kids with autism, often that's where we first meet them. The other bit is repetitive restrictive behaviours. They get really focused on certain activities, like doing them over and over again, and struggle with transitions. It's where all the sensory stuff comes in. Certain clothes really irritate them, certain environments. And
Interesting.
we can walk into an environment and go, it's just a supermarket. Why are they struggling in here? But if you had the sound up to 100, the lights blinding you, everyone kind of bumping into you aggressively, you wouldn't want to be there either.
No.
And that's the experience they have.
Right, okay.
100%.
Fascinating, Anne. Thank you very much for your question. Natalie in St Clair, you got Dr Billy Garvey here, Nat.
Hi.
Hi.
Question for Dr. Billy Garvey, Nat?
Yes. How much screen time is too much?
Oh, you get this question a bit, wouldn't you, Dr. Billy?
Yeah, I love this question. So there's a lot of the, Australia, America, UK, they've got guidelines, and it's essentially the Australian one is under 2-year-old never see a screen, 2 to 5, 1 hour a day. Over 5, it's up to 2 hours. And on the last survey we did nationally, about 70% of parents exceed those recommendations, and I think 30% of people lie.
Yeah.
Because it's it's crazy and it's ridiculous, and it's not actually. I love just hearing families ask that question, because ignore it. Don't even think about time.
Yes.
Think about what can I put in its place.
Right.
I saw 4 or 5 kids yesterday glued to iPads, and parents are going crazy every time I try and take it off them. They swear. One mum kind of only charges it to 20% overnight and says that just so
it dies.
Yeah,
so it dies, and then that's it's gone for the day. It's going to have to charge overnight. But it's really important, like we talked about before, put something in its place. Put activities, relationships. If you just tell kids get off the iPad and the other option is sit around and do nothing, it's so stimulating, it's so engaging. So you need to be careful with that being your priority. But what the best thing we can do is fit in other things into their life that is a richer developmental experience, like interacting with people, like running around, all that stuff. And remembering also that there are positive elements. Some of my older mentors, professors would have disagreed with me about this, but a lot of kids, especially with neurodiversity, that's where their social world exists, is online. A lot of kids, their creative output is on screens. It can be helpful. It's just they need other stuff too.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Well done. Lachlan in Penrith, Dr Billy Garvey, what's your question, Lachlan?
My question is shouting at your kids a bad thing, and what is the best way to discipline your child?
Yeah, so it's not a bad thing, because I think one of the things that the mistakes we make as parents, I worry about this too with my own kids, is that I shouldn't show them explosive emotions. But the reality is, if those kids grow up and they've never seen it, then when they experience it themselves, they won't know what to do with it. And they're like, what's wrong with me? Dad never got upset like this.
Yeah.
We can also role model the recovery. There's 3 important bits of emotions: how we respond to it, how we talk about it outside of the emotional difficulties kids are having, and then how we role model our own kind of emotional difficulties, explosions, and how we recover. And coming back and saying, I got so annoyed then, I'm really sorry, it's unacceptable that I yelled like that, I'm really working on it, this is what I'm doing with it, how are you going about that? And checking in. So it's an important thing. Now with discipline, the problem with discipline is that the kind of negative reinforcement can occur. So what I mean by that is the kid's really struggling and they are really annoyed, and so they start shouting and elevating. Now as the parent, you go, well, I'm either going to give in because I don't want to have this fight and I don't have time, I got to get to work or whatever. That reinforces the kid doing it again next time. They go, that worked. If you're like, go to your room, I'm grounding you for 2 weeks, I'm taking away your pocket money, you're not seeing your mates tonight, that reinforces for you that strategy worked, and you're more likely to do it again. What's better is, outside of those times of distress, going, how are we going? That's called reflective practice. What's important to us as a family? How are we going to do it together? And then if you find you're still having a lot of conflict and shouting all the time, going, hey, this isn't working. And the most common reason that is because the demand being asked of you exceeds your capacity.
Sure.
You're like, I don't have time to do this. We're trying to do 10 different things
Quick
as a family.
fix.
And you just go, drop the homework, drop the vegetables, drop all that stuff, and be like, I just need to connect with this kid and build back the positive relationship I have with them.
So when you're yelling out, just do your homework, you little mongrel. It's not always the best solution. You know what I
No,
mean?
it's not. And that's to you. That's not even to my kids.
I think, Billy, what I hear you talk about a lot, and it's because parents can ask 1,000 questions, and you're right. There's so much going on. There's always 10 things going on inside the house, but you touch on the fact that prioritising your own mental health as a parent is really important, because generally, if you're okay, the child will be okay, you know? So is there any just little piece of advice around kind of looking after yourself, or what should parents be doing to kind of put that step almost at the beginning, and then deal with the child after that? Hopefully there's a flow-on effect.
Yeah, definitely. You know, the most important protective factor around kids is primary caregivers, and having, you know, the greatest capacity is really important. And we've talked about kind of the role modelling mental health, but it also kind of fuels you to be the best parent you can be. But a lot of, especially mums, are just like, I don't have time, I can't prioritise that. I'm a mum, I've got to look after these kids. But you'll be better, you know, equipped if you are also dealing with that. We know that 50% of adult mental illness starts in childhood. So the problem is, for a lot of parents who have got a kid that's struggling, it really opens up these wounds about their own childhood. And they're like, yeah, look, this kid is really struggling. They're dysregulating. They don't have any friends. They're getting bullied. Whatever it is, that was me. And that's really hard, because then it opens up as parents our own kind of mental wounds. So if we're not dealing with them, it kind of ties both our hands behind our back when we're trying to help our kids too.
Right.
But yeah, it's one of the hardest bits of parenting, I think, is that trying to, you know, account for the fact that it brings up so much from our own childhood.
Yep, too true.
Dr. Bill, this is unbelievable. Thank you so much. If you want more information and to get in touch, head to billygarvey.com. That's his website, but also Pop Culture Parenting is the podcast that Kate was talking about as well. We know how busy you are, mate, so thank you very much for coming in, Doc.
No, lovely to talk to you guys.
Thanks, Dr. Billy.
Always.
Fitzy and Whipper with Kate Ritchie is a Nova podcast. For more great comedy shows like this, head to novapodcast.com.au.